In a world filled with noise, complexity, and constant reaction, your greatest weapon is not how fast you move, but how clearly you think. Most people are pulled by impulses, hijacked by emotion, and trapped in patterns they don't even recognize. They're not weak, they're untrained, because clear thinking isn't something we're born with. It's something we develop, deliberately, quietly, strategically. When the Stoics trained the mind, they weren't chasing knowledge to impress others. They were sharpening their judgment to survive chaos with clarity, to act with purpose while others froze in panic, to stand still in the storm, not because they had control over the world, but because they had mastered the only thing that ever truly matters: how they respond to it. This episode is not about IQ. It's not about sounding smart or collecting facts. It's about the art of seeing clearly, choosing wisely, and responding powerfully, especially when life becomes unpredictable. Today, we'll walk through 11 powerful principles that will help you train your mind to become more strategic, more disciplined, and more effective under pressure. We'll talk about breaking mental autopilot, dismantling bias, mastering emotional intelligence, and thinking from first principles. Tools for people who don't want to be manipulated by the moment, but who want to master it instead. This is critical thinking, not as a school subject, but as a way of life. 1. The foundation of strategic intelligence. There's a kind of intelligence that doesn't shout. It doesn't come from diplomas, debates, or displays of knowledge. It moves quietly, calmly, often unnoticed, but when it acts, it cuts straight through confusion like a blade. This is strategic intelligence. And unlike raw intellect, it's not about how much you know. It's about how deeply you see. Strategic intelligence is the art of seeing clearly, thinking ahead, and choosing wisely, even when emotions are high and uncertainty clouds the road. It's not found in textbooks. It's forged in silence, in self-control, in reflection. It's the discipline of the mind to ask better questions instead of chasing louder answers. The Stoics were masters of this kind of intelligence. They didn't seek knowledge to feel superior. They sought wisdom to act correctly. Marcus Aurelius didn't rule Rome with emotion. He ruled it with restraint. Seneca didn't just study philosophy. He practiced it when power, betrayal, and temptation circled him like wolves. Their strategic minds weren't built on theory. They were built through fire, through pressure, through the conscious decision to pause instead of react. That's the beginning of strategy, the pause, the space between stimulus and response. It's where most people lose the battle. They act fast, they react emotionally, they regret instantly. But strategic thinkers, they pause, they slow the moment down. And in that pause, they gather more than information. They gather leverage. Because the real enemy of intelligence isn't ignorance, it's impulse. And if you don't learn to interrupt your automatic reactions, no amount of education will save you from bad decisions. That's why developing strategic thinking starts with mastering your awareness, noticing your assumptions, observing your emotional shifts, training your attention to detect the subtle, the patterns, the motives, the blind spots others miss. Think of your mind like a battlefield. If you rush in without a map, you lose. If you panic when the plan breaks, you lose. But if you take time to see the terrain, to study the opponent, to understand the deeper game, even a smaller army can win. That's what this kind of thinking gives you. Not size, but precision. Not speed, but timing. And it's something you can train. Start by asking yourself one question before every major action. What's really going on here? Not just what it looks like, not what others say, but beneath the surface. What's the game? Who benefits? What patterns are repeating? What emotion is driving me right now? These questions are your weapons. They cut through manipulation. They reveal the truth before it's too late. Then create space. Strategy doesn't live in urgency. It lives in clarity. Take a walk before you reply. Journal before you decide. Reflect before you act. It's not weakness. It's intelligence. It's how you conserve energy while others burn out in noise and reaction. And remember, the goal isn't to control everything. It's to understand your position, your power, and your priorities, so that when you do act, you're not guessing, you're striking, deliberately, precisely, strategically. So if you want to train your brain to outsmart chaos, pressure, manipulation, and uncertainty, begin here, with awareness, with patience, with a mindset that asks not what's easy, but what's effective. Because in the long game of life, power belongs not to the loudest, but to the clearest mind in the room. 2. Breaking free from mental autopilot. Most people don't realize how little of their thinking is truly theirs, not because they're incapable of deep thought, but because they've been conditioned into automatic thought, habits of reaction, patterns of assumption, emotional loops so old they feel like truth. This is mental autopilot, a silent force that guides your decisions, your beliefs, and your behavior without asking for permission. And if you don't notice it, you'll mistake repetition for wisdom, familiarity for truth, noise for clarity. Breaking free from this state is the first real step toward critical thinking, because as long as you're operating from automation, strategy is impossible. You're not choosing, you're recycling, not questioning, just performing. And here's the quiet danger. Autopilot doesn't feel chaotic. It feels comfortable, predictable, safe. That's why it's so powerful. You're living in patterns that were shaped by the past, not by your current potential. And every day you don't question them, they grow stronger. The Stoics warned about this. They believed that philosophy, real philosophy, begins when you stop living blindly, when you pause long enough to ask, why do I believe this? Why did I react that way? Whose voice is that in my head? Mine or someone else's? Those questions, simple as they sound, are the crowbar that breaks the seal of mental autopilot. Start noticing the scripts you follow, the way you respond when someone disagrees, the assumptions you make about people before they speak, the beliefs you've carried for years, not because you tested them, but because they were handed to you. This isn't about judgment, it's about observation. Because once you can see a pattern, you're no longer inside it. You've created space, and in that space, you can choose. One of the most effective ways to break the autopilot is to disrupt routine, just slightly. Change your environment, alter your habits. Sit with discomfort instead of numbing it. If you always react immediately, pause. If you always speak quickly, wait. If you always think you're right, challenge that thought. These small reversals crack the cycle and force your brain to pay attention again. Reflection is your sharpest tool here. 10 minutes a day. Ask yourself, where did I act on autopilot today? What emotion took control without my permission? What assumptions did I carry without examining them? That's not weakness. That's strategic awareness. That's how you begin to wake up. And don't expect this to feel natural. It won't, at first. The mind clings to comfort, even when it keeps you small. But the more you step out of autopilot, the more you remember what it feels like to be present. To choose your reactions, not just deliver them out of habit. That presence becomes the foundation of intelligence. Because from there, you're not just thinking, you're thinking clearly. The goal isn't to become emotionless, it's to become aware enough to act through wisdom, not impulse. You'll still feel frustration, fear, pride, but you won't be controlled by them. You'll observe, you'll assess, and then you'll act in alignment with your values, not your urges. This is the quiet rebellion, to no longer let old programming run your life, to no longer confuse instinct with insight, to step off autopilot and take the wheel of your own mind, because once you do, you stop reacting to life and start shaping it. 3. Recognizing and defeating cognitive biases. Your brain isn't wired to see the truth. It's wired to survive. That means it takes shortcuts. It fills in gaps. It protects your ego. It avoids discomfort. And in doing so, it often distorts reality, quietly, automatically, and convincingly. These distortions are known as cognitive biases, and if you don't learn how to recognize them, they'll quietly sabotage your judgment while convincing you you're thinking clearly. This is where most people go wrong. They assume intelligence equals clarity. But raw intelligence can actually make biases worse, because smart people are better at rationalizing. They can twist logic to support what they already want to believe. That's why critical thinking isn't about having a strong mind. It's about having a humble one. The Stoics warned about this trap long ago. They didn't just seek knowledge, they practiced detachment. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." But that strength comes only when you can first admit how often the mind fools itself. Let's make this practical. Here are just a few common biases that silently damage decision-making. Confirmation bias. You search for evidence that proves what you already believe and ignore what contradicts it. Negativity bias. You give more weight to threats and criticisms than to progress or praise. Anchoring bias. Your first impression, even if irrelevant, overly influences your decisions. Availability bias. You rely on the information that's easiest to recall, not necessarily what's most accurate. Now imagine trying to make strategic decisions while all of these are running in the background, unchecked. You can't outthink bias with more thinking alone. You outthink it by exposing it. That begins with humility. A willingness to say, "I might be wrong." A readiness to ask, "What am I not seeing?" These aren't signs of doubt. They're signs of real clarity. Start training your mind to look for your own blind spots. After you form an opinion, pause and ask, "What would I see if I believed the opposite?" When you make a decision, ask, "What's influencing me emotionally right now?" When you judge someone quickly, ask, "What information do I not have?" These questions break the spell of assumption. They restore your ability to reason instead of just react. Also, surround yourself with people who don't think exactly like you, not to argue, but to stretch. Echo chambers are where bias thrives. Exposure to new perspectives, even uncomfortable ones, sharpens your mental edge. You don't need to agree with everyone, but you do need to listen, not just to win, but to understand. One of the most powerful exercises. Write down a belief you hold strongly, then write out the best possible argument against it. You'll feel resistance. That's your ego clinging to certainty. But push through it. And what you gain is not just knowledge, it's range. And range makes you powerful. The goal isn't to remove bias completely. That's impossible. The goal is to become aware of it, to notice when it's pulling you, to slow down long enough to question what feels obvious. Because what feels obvious is often just familiar. not necessarily true. In a world where emotion spreads faster than truth, bias is the default. But clarity is still possible for the few who are willing to think beyond what's comfortable. And when you become one of those few, your decisions become sharper, your thinking becomes cleaner, and your actions begin to reflect wisdom, not impulse. So remember, the enemy is not ignorance. The enemy is the illusion of certainty. 4. The power of mental models. Clear thinking is not just about intelligence. It's about structure. It's the ability to see a situation, break it down, and make sense of it without being overwhelmed. That's where mental models come in. Think of them as lenses, frameworks you hold up to the world to help you see more clearly. And the more lenses you have, the more angles you can think from. The better you navigate complexity, pressure, and uncertainty, not by instinct, but by design. Most people don't realize it, but they already use mental models. They just don't choose them consciously. They default to what they've been taught: linear thinking, emotion-based judgment, all or nothing logic. And those models, if left unexamined, become traps. They shrink your options. They distort your perspective. They limit your ability to adapt. But the Stoics had mental models long before the term existed. The dichotomy of control is a model. Memento mori is a model. Premeditatio malorum, the rehearsal of adversity, is another. These aren't abstract ideas. They're strategic tools that help you interpret reality and respond with wisdom instead of chaos. Let's make this practical. Imagine you're in a situation where a deal falls through. Most people would respond with frustration or blame, but someone trained in the mental model of second-order thinking will pause and ask, what are the consequences of this? Not just now, but 2 steps from now. That delay in reaction, that space between outcome and meaning, is where intelligence lives. Or think of inversion. Instead of asking, how can I succeed, you ask, how could I fail? And then work backward to avoid those risks. That's what Stoics did with negative visualization. They didn't hope everything would go well. They prepared their mind for what could go wrong, so that if it did, they weren't paralyzed. That's not pessimism. That's preparation. Mental models give you agility. They stop you from reacting emotionally and help you think strategically. If you only have one way of thinking, every problem starts to look the same. But with the right mental toolbox, you become flexible, calm under pressure, able to pivot without panic. So how do you start building this toolbox? First, study the models. Read about first principles, systems thinking, second-order effects, opportunity cost, probabilistic thinking. Not to memorize them, but to apply them. Each time you face a challenge, ask, which model applies here? Over time, this becomes instinctive. Second, reflect. After each decision you make, journal it. Ask, what model did I use, consciously or not? What did I miss? What would I do differently next time? This practice builds metacognition, awareness of how you think, which is one of the most powerful forms of intelligence. Third, simplify. Don't get lost in theory. One well-applied model is better than 10 unread books. The point isn't to be clever. The point is to make better decisions, more consistently, with less emotional drag. Because in a complex world, intelligence isn't about memorizing more facts. It's about having tools, frameworks that help you cut through noise, focus your mind, and act with precision. Mental models won't remove uncertainty, but they'll teach you how to navigate it. They'll give you leverage when others are stuck in emotion, and they'll help you think like a strategist, not just a survivor. So remember, the mind, untrained, is reactive, but the mind, equipped with the right models, becomes unstoppable. 5. First principles, thinking revolution. Most people don't think, they imitate. They don't solve problems from the root. They patch them, decorate them, or inherit someone else's solution and hope it fits. But thinking in layers is not the same as thinking from the source. And in a world addicted to shortcuts, first principles thinking is a radical return to clarity. This kind of thinking strips away assumptions. It cuts through traditions, trends, even language. It asks the most uncomfortable but essential question: what is absolutely true? Not what you were told, not what's popular, not what's been done before, but what is undeniably real, and what can be built from that place. The Stoics lived here. Their questions were brutal in their honesty. Epictetus didn't ask, "What do people think of me?" He asked, "What do I control?" Marcus Aurelius didn't ask, "How do I make everyone happy?" He asked, "What is the right thing to do, regardless of applause or rejection?" That's first principles. It's not rebellion, it's reconstruction. In modern terms, think of Elon Musk, who revived this method publicly. When others said batteries are too expensive, he asked, "What are batteries made of? What's the cost of those raw materials?" From that breakdown, he rebuilt the cost structure. He didn't tweak the problem, he reframed it. That's the core of first principles thinking. Break the problem down to its fundamental truths, then rebuild from scratch. Here's how to apply it. Identify the problem or belief, something you've accepted, assumed, or inherited. Deconstruct it to its base components. What is this really made of? What's beneath the surface story? Question every layer. What part of this is just habit, emotion, social pressure? What part is truly necessary? Reconstruct based on truth, not tradition. Let's make this personal. Say you believe, "I'm just not a disciplined person." Most would try to fix this by forcing new routines or following someone else's system. But from first principles, you break it down. What is discipline? Consistent action. What affects consistency? Energy, clarity, motivation, environment. Then you ask, which of those am I actually struggling with? Maybe it's not you. Maybe it's your sleep. Maybe your goals are vague. Maybe your tools are wrong. Now, you're no longer trying to copy someone else's life. You're designing your own from the ground up. This method doesn't just apply to personal growth, it applies to everything: relationships, career, health. Instead of asking, "What should I do next?" ask, "What does this look like if I started from zero, with no rules, no noise, just truth?" It takes more effort, it takes more thinking, but the solutions you find are real, tailored, resilient, because they're yours, not borrowed, not forced, not assumed. The hardest part? Letting go of what you've always believed. Some of your current strategies are built on sand. Some of your truths are just convenient opinions you inherited to avoid conflict. But first principles isn't here to flatter you. It's here to free you. And freedom starts with reconstruction, not on the surface, but at the root. 6. Mastering decision. Making under pressure. Pressure is the moment when your thinking gets tested. Not your knowledge, not your ambition, but your clarity. Anyone can make good decisions when they're calm, well-rested, and unchallenged. But when the stakes are high, emotions flare, time is short, and the outcome matters. Most people either freeze, panic, or fall into habits that no longer serve them. That's where critical thinking collapses, not from lack of intelligence, but from lack of structure. But here's the truth. Pressure doesn't destroy clarity. It reveals whether or not you've trained for it. Stoic thinkers knew this well. They practiced premeditatio malorum, visualizing worst-case scenarios in advance, not to invite fear, but to prepare the mind to remain steady when reality tests them. They trained themselves to expect resistance, to welcome discomfort, so that when pressure came, they didn't lose themselves in it. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, "If you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it." And that estimate, that interpretation, is the foundation of all decision-making. Let's break this down. When you're under pressure, your nervous system enters fight or flight. Cortisol spikes. Your brain narrows its focus. Emotion takes over logic. You lose the ability to think long-term, to weigh consequences, to remain objective. You move toward the familiar, not the strategic. This is normal, but it doesn't have to be your default. The first tool under pressure is the pause. One breath, one full inhale and exhale. It sounds basic, almost too simple, but neurologically it works. That pause breaks the chemical loop. It shifts your brain out of reaction mode and into reflection. Even 5 seconds of stillness can prevent 5 weeks of damage from a rash decision. The second tool is framing. When you reframe pressure as a test, not a threat, you regain control. Instead of asking, "What if I fail?" ask, "What matters most here?" Pressure tricks the mind into exaggerating consequences. But critical thinking is the ability to zoom out, to bring perspective back into a narrow moment. That shift in framing changes everything. Third, build a mental checklist. A short set of questions you ask yourself anytime you feel your clarity slipping. What do I know for sure? What am I assuming? What's the worst-case outcome, and how likely is it really? What would I tell someone else to do in this situation? These questions slow the emotional brain and activate the rational one. They restore your ability to choose wisely instead of react instinctively. And finally, train ahead of time. Don't wait until you're deep in pressure to learn how to think clearly. Create small challenges now that strengthen your mental muscle. Take cold showers. Practice difficult conversations. Time your decisions. Train your mind to stay calm while others speed up. That's not just self-control, that's cognitive endurance. Because here's what most people forget. Pressure doesn't care how smart you are. It only reveals how prepared you are. So if you want to master decision-making under pressure, start by mastering your inner environment, your breath, your frame, your questions, your ability to stay rooted in logic even when emotion is loud. You'll still feel the heat, but you won't lose your mind to it. And that makes all the difference between reacting impulsively and responding with power. 7. Pattern recognition and strategic anticipation. The world rewards those who can see one move ahead, but it reveres those who can see 3, 5, 10 moves into the future. This isn't about guessing. It's not about predicting the future with certainty. It's about understanding patterns, how humans behave, how events unfold, how consequences ripple, and then positioning yourself with quiet precision before others even realize what's happening. Pattern recognition is the invisible backbone of strategic thinking. It's what allows the calm leader to stay still while others panic. It's what gives the disciplined mind an edge in chaotic environments. It's how you stop reacting blindly and start anticipating wisely. And in every field, business, relationships, personal growth, This one skill separates those who merely cope from those who shape. The Stoics didn't use the word pattern recognition, but they practiced it religiously. They studied nature, behavior, politics, and philosophy to understand what repeats. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself, "Nothing happens to any man that he is not formed by nature to bear." In other words, what happens is not new. What you feel is not unique. The patterns have been here before, and they'll be here again. So how do you train this? It starts with slowing down. Patterns aren't visible to a mind that's moving too fast. You have to become a student of detail, of human nature, of your own emotional cycles, of how situations tend to escalate or resolve. When you're in conversation, observe tone, not just words. When you watch your thoughts, notice the loop, not just the story. Second, study history, read biographies, analyze market cycles, journal your own behavior across months. You'll start to see the same fears showing up with different names, the same bad habits appearing in new disguises, the same emotional storms returning like seasons again and again. And once you see it, you can step outside of it. That's anticipation. But don't confuse pattern recognition with paranoia. This isn't about overthinking. It's about noticing early signals without letting them dominate you. For example, if a conversation with someone always ends in conflict, observe the first 5 minutes next time. When does the tension begin? What trigger is hidden in plain sight? These micro-patterns are everywhere. Once you train your awareness to see them, you stop being blindsided. You start being prepared. Strategic anticipation is the next level. It's where you not only see the pattern, you map the likely outcomes. You ask, if this continues, what happens next? If I say this, how will they react? If I wait 3 more days, how might the situation shift? This isn't manipulation, it's wisdom. And it comes from emotional detachment, the ability to analyze without rushing to control. Here's a practical exercise. After any major interaction, a meeting, an argument, a negotiation, take 5 minutes to ask, what pattern did I notice? What behavior repeated from the past? What signal did I miss early on? What can I adjust next time? This reflection becomes your edge, because most people repeat their mistakes not out of ignorance, but out of speed. They're moving too fast to study their own mind, let alone someone else's. But you're not most people. You're here to think deeper, to move slower, to see what others miss. When you develop this habit of noticing, not just acting, the world begins to slow down around you, and what once felt unpredictable becomes manageable, maybe not controllable, but understandable. And understanding in a world of confusion is a form of power few ever develop. So, watch closely, study deeply, and trust what you see. Because those who understand the patterns of life learn how to bend them in their favor. 8. Advanced problem decomposition techniques. Big problems are never solved all at once. They feel overwhelming, unsolvable, even paralyzing, not because they're impossible, but because they're still whole. You're trying to eat the entire mountain instead of carving the trail. That's where the power of decomposition comes in, the ability to take what feels massive and break it into something thinkable, clear, and actionable. This is not just a productivity hack, it's a way of training your brain to process complexity without panic, to remain sharp when others are overwhelmed. And it's one of the most underrated forms of intelligence, the kind that doesn't just understand a problem, it reorganizes it. The Stoics practiced a version of this long before it had a name. When Marcus Aurelius faced illness, betrayal, political chaos, he didn't write about the whole storm. He broke it down. What is in my control? What is not? What is this pain made of? Just a sensation. What is this fear? A thought. That's decomposition. He wasn't oversimplifying. He was deconstructing, so he could act with power instead of being swallowed by magnitude. Let's look at how to apply this in your own mind. Step 1. Define the problem clearly. Most people never get past this. They confuse symptoms for causes. I'm overwhelmed is not a problem. It's a signal. What are you overwhelmed by? What's vague? What's blocked? If the problem can't be described precisely, it can't be solved precisely. Step 2. Break it into components. Use what's called tree thinking. Imagine the problem is the trunk. Now ask, what are the major branches? For a career decision, for example, the branches might be financial stability, personal interest, long-term growth, time investment. From there, each branch gets sub-branches. Drill down. Get specific. Step 3. Prioritize the parts. Not every branch matters equally. Which component is the bottleneck? Which part has the highest impact if solved? Strategic thinkers don't try to do everything. They isolate the leverage point. The one piece that, if changed, affects the whole system. Step 4. Assign metrics or criteria. Emotions love vagueness. The more ambiguous the decision, the more anxious the mind becomes. But when you turn a fuzzy problem into measurable elements, deadlines, outcomes, values, you reduce emotional fog. You can see what matters, and when you can see it, you can act on it. Step 5. Map the interdependencies. Some problems can't be solved in isolation. One part affects the others. Advanced thinkers look for feedback loops. If I fix this now, how does it influence that later? Which step depends on which? This thinking is what prevents short-term solutions that cause long-term chaos. Here's the real magic of decomposition. It doesn't just make the problem smaller, it makes you bigger. It puts you in the role of designer, not just responder. And that shift from reacting to redesigning is where strategic clarity lives. Try this in your next hard situation. Sit down, draw it out. Don't overthink it, just break it apart. You'll start to see things you didn't notice before. Small wins, obvious dead ends, emotional blind spots. It's not therapy, it's structure. And structure is what the mind craves when life gets loud. The biggest problems you face aren't always as big as they seem. They're just bundled. Untangle them, and you'll find that what once felt like a mountain was really just a series of quiet steps waiting to be taken. 9. Emotional intelligence in strategic thinking. There's a common myth that to be strategic, you have to shut off emotion. That clear thinking means cold thinking. But the truth is the opposite. Emotions don't block intelligence. They reveal what your mind values. And if you know how to listen, they can become one of the sharpest tools in your thinking arsenal. The problem isn't emotion itself. It's untrained emotion, unexamined emotion, emotion mistaken for fact. Emotional intelligence is not softness. It's precision. It's the skill of recognizing what you feel, understanding where it comes from, and deciding what to do with it, without being hijacked by it. It's the ability to think with your emotions, not just around them. This is something the Stoics understood deeply. People often mistake them for emotionally numb, but that's a misreading. Marcus Aurelius felt anger, grief, fear. He just didn't obey them blindly. Seneca wrote about anxiety, loss, frustration, but from a place of inquiry, not surrender. Their strength wasn't in having no emotion. It was in mastering their response to it. So how does emotional intelligence fit into critical thinking? First, it sharpens self-awareness. Every decision you make is colored by what you feel, whether you admit it or not. If you're stressed, you'll default to short-term solutions. If you're afraid, you'll overestimate risk. If you're insecure, you'll seek approval instead of truth. But if you can recognize the emotional current beneath your thinking, you can correct your course before it pulls you off track. Second, emotional intelligence enhances perspective. In strategy, people are not problems to solve, they're patterns to understand. Whether you're leading, negotiating, or navigating personal dynamics, the ability to read emotional signals, tone, body language, hesitation, gives you a silent edge. Most people only hear words. The emotionally intelligent mind hears the subtext. Third, it regulates reaction speed. When something triggers you, a harsh comment, a delay, a perceived threat, emotion floods the system. And if you're not trained, you'll act too fast. You'll say something you regret. You'll make a decision to escape discomfort rather than solve the actual problem. Emotional intelligence gives you the ability to pause, name what's happening internally, and choose a response that serves your goal, not just your pride. Here's a simple technique. When you feel a strong emotion rising, especially during conflict or stress, silently ask yourself, what is this emotion trying to protect? Is it your status, your sense of safety, your desire to be understood? This question turns reaction into reflection. It repositions emotion as data, not a danger. And here's the deeper layer. Emotional intelligence isn't just about regulation, it's about alignment. When your emotions and your values are in sync, your decisions become effortless. There's no internal war, no tug-of-war between logic and feeling. You trust your instincts because you've trained them to operate with clarity. But that alignment only happens through practice. Journal your reactions, debrief your conflicts, reflect on what triggered you and why. Apologize quickly, forgive slowly, stay curious, especially when it's uncomfortable. These aren't just good habits, they're discipline for the emotional brain. And the more disciplined your emotional awareness becomes, the sharper your critical thinking gets. Because when others are caught in ego, in drama, in reaction, you'll be calm. Not because you don't feel, but because you know what to do with what you feel. And that, in a world full of chaos, is the mark of a true strategist. Not cold, but clear. 10. Building adaptable intelligence in a rapidly changing world. The rules are shifting faster than ever. The career paths, the social norms, the information streams, nothing stays still for long. What worked 5 years ago might be irrelevant tomorrow. And in this kind of world, it's not the smartest who thrive. It's the most adaptable. The ones who know how to unlearn, to update their thinking, to remain curious even when their beliefs are challenged. Adaptable intelligence is the ability to keep growing while the world keeps changing. It's the opposite of rigid certainty. It's humble, observant, self-correcting, and it's quickly becoming the difference between those who lead and those who get left behind. The Stoics understood this long before the modern world. Epictetus warned against clinging to false certainty. He taught that wisdom isn't about knowing everything, it's about knowing how little you control and adjusting accordingly. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that the world would not conform to his wishes, so his mind must become flexible enough to meet reality as it is, not as he hoped it would be. Today, the challenge is even greater. Algorithms shift what we see. Technology reshapes how we work. Opinions move at the speed of headlines, but your power, your real anchor, is not found in resisting the change. It's found in mastering how you respond to it. So how do you build this kind of intelligence? First, become a student again, constantly. Treat every situation like a lesson, every person like a teacher, every failure like feedback. Replace the instinct to defend with the instinct to examine. When something feels unfamiliar, don't reject it immediately. Ask, what can this teach me? Second, detach your identity from being right. Most people confuse intelligence with correctness, but real thinkers know this. If you always have the same answers, you're not evolving, you're rehearsing. The fastest way to grow is to become comfortable with being wrong, because that's where insight lives. Third, develop learning systems. Don't just read, reflect. Don't just consume, apply. Build a rhythm that feeds your mind the way exercise feeds your body. Set time for thinking, not just doing. Set time for re-evaluating, not just executing. This is what keeps your thinking alive, not just informed, but agile. Fourth, practice cognitive flexibility. Put yourself in unfamiliar situations. Speak with people outside your echo chamber. Try solving problems in industries or fields that have nothing to do with your own. Why? Because the brain grows through contrast, through friction, through diversity of thought. The more perspectives you can hold, the sharper your mental edge becomes. And fifth, never confuse speed with progress. The world might be moving faster, but that doesn't mean you have to. In fact, slowing down might be the smartest thing you can do, because adaptability isn't just about reacting, it's about seeing. And you can't see clearly if your mind is always rushing to keep up. So pause, zoom out, recalibrate. Adaptable intelligence is not reactive, it's intentional. It's the quiet confidence that says, whatever comes, I will learn, I will adjust, I will grow. Because in a world of constant change, your greatest asset is not what you know, but how ready you are to keep learning. 11. Advanced influence and persuasion strategies. Influence is often misunderstood. People think it's about being louder, more charismatic, or having some secret technique to win people over. But real influence, lasting, strategic, deeply human influence, is not about overpowering minds. It's about understanding them. It's about clarity, precision, and alignment. And at its core, persuasion is not about control. It's about connection. The Stoics knew this, though they rarely spoke of persuasion in modern terms. Marcus Aurelius led armies and ruled an empire, yet he wrote not about dominance, but about character. Epictetus taught that the best way to influence another person is to master your own judgment. Why? Because when your mind is clear, your words become weight. You speak less, but say more. You stop trying to win people and begin guiding them. So what does advanced persuasion actually look like? It starts with understanding human drivers. Every person, no matter how complex, is driven by a few core needs: significance, safety, belonging, freedom, and growth. If you can speak to these needs clearly, ethically, and without pressure, you bypass resistance. You stop arguing. You start resonating. Next comes clarity of intention. Before you try to persuade anyone, ask yourself why. If your goal is manipulation, people will feel it. No matter how skilled your language is, the emotional energy underneath it leaks through. But if your goal is alignment, to help, to serve, to elevate, that honesty becomes your power. You don't need tricks. You need presence. Another crucial tool is framing. The way you present an idea often matters more than the idea itself. Don't just offer a fact, offer a perspective. Don't just explain a decision, offer the reasoning that led to it. When people feel included in the logic behind a choice, they feel empowered, not coerced. And that's what opens minds. Then there's mirroring and language calibration. You don't influence people by speaking in your language. You influence by entering their world, their vocabulary, their pace, their emotional rhythm. Listen not just for what they say, but how they say it. Match their energy subtly. Make them feel understood, not imitated, understood. And from that place, you guide. Another vital principle: avoid arguing. Debate creates resistance, but aligned questioning opens space. Use the Socratic method. Ask clear, calm, curious questions. Let them reach conclusions on their own. You're not imposing a view, you're revealing it. And finally, the most powerful tool of all: credibility through congruence. People may doubt your words, but they will always read your consistency. If your actions contradict your message, your influence evaporates. But if your life reflects what you teach, your presence becomes persuasive without effort. That's the deepest level of influence. Not what you say, but what you embody. In practical terms, here's how to apply these ideas. Start with listening. Listen longer than you speak. Clarify your message to one key idea, not 10. Use stories, not just arguments. Stories engage the emotional mind. Speak in terms of values, not just outcomes. And above all, model what you ask others to believe. Show, don't sell. Because real persuasion is not force, it's gravity. It's the kind of presence that people want to follow, not because they have to, but because it makes sense to. So remember, you don't need to be louder. You need to be clearer. You don't need to convince everyone. You just need to stand fully in what you know and let that speak for itself. You've just walked through 11 strategies, not for sounding smart, but for thinking clearly. Not for controlling life, but for outsmarting confusion, chaos and fear with a trained, focused mind. This is the real armor, not noise, not pride, not reaction, but precision, patience, perspective. Every one of these tools, from breaking mental autopilot to mastering decision-making under pressure, is a way to reclaim your greatest power, your mind. And not the frantic, overthinking mind the world tries to give you. I'm talking about the calm, trained, watchful mind, the one that pauses before acting, that separates signal from noise, that sees patterns where others see problems, and moves forward with quiet, undeniable clarity. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to remember every technique. Just choose one. Start there. Practice it. Let it shape your thinking. Because every time you choose awareness over reaction, every time you pause and ask better questions, you're rewiring your mind. You're becoming the kind of person who doesn't get pulled around by life. You lead it. And that's rare, but it's powerful. If this episode gave you something to think about, share it. Let someone else walk this road with you. And if you're not already subscribed, do it now. We've only just begun. Because the more we sharpen the mind, the more powerful and peaceful life becomes.